Affordable Health Care for America Act, also called Obamacare, barely made it to this final outcome. Because of its unpopularity over 3 years ago, the legislative votes weren't there, and it took lots of arm twisting and ultimate bribery to make it through the House and Senate. Afterward, many were hopeful that the Supreme Court would rule this government mandate put on the citizens unconstitutional, but Justice Roberts, who was thought to be conservative, surprised everyone and upheld this law by a 5-4 decision. Again, many thought we would be free from this intrusive law after the presidential election, and we all know how that turned out. At the end of the show, I want to share why I personally won't touch Obamacare. My guest is a champion to this cause of freedom and has been very active in trying to prevent what we are now seeing implemented, Dr. Eric Swinson. Thank you for all you've done trying to prevent this from becoming law.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's an important issue that it will affect all of us, so it's important for people to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think you were here a couple of years ago when everything was really heated up.
A lot of discussion, had the debates, had the local debates in town. I think you had me on at that time.
Yeah, and what have you been doing between now and then?
Well, I'm working as a chief medical officer for a company and also working at wound care here in town. So I've been trying to keep up with what's going on. As we know, the Obamacare, or the legislation that was written, was really written to allow the Secretary of Health and Human Services to write the law. So the law is being written as we speak tonight, and has been written some, and will continue to be written over the next year or two, all in a regulatory fashion. So there's no debate from that standpoint, no legislative activity, but things that we will be living under are occurring as we speak this evening.
Yeah, just mandated, put on us in a really dictatorial fashion.
It's, it's, as they say, democracies are messy, and this is definitely one of the messiest things we've seen. It was a huge shift in power from individuals to the government, huge shift in financial control, and come 2014, when the individual mandate will become law unless the Supreme Court rules again, and this time against it, the mandate will become law, and we will all be tasked with either buying our own insurance or getting insurance for some fee through the federal or state government. Okay, so
isn't something starting in 2013?
Well, there are parts of the bill that have been going on. For instance, everyone's heard about the fact that when you're up to 26 years of age, you could be on your parents' policy, things of that sort. There are a lot of things going on kind of behind the scenes that most people don't know about, as far as requirements from hospitals, requirements from physicians, requirements about electronic medical records. Some quality metrics, some are good, some are very difficult. So there are things changing all the time that, again, the average person, there would be no reason for them to know or be aware of what's going on. So the kind of what's out there is what will happen really in 2014. All these other things are important, but they're almost very small compared to the 2014. Because the 2014, what will happen is that the businesses that have their employees under health care, they will either have to decide to drop their employees from the business paying for the insurance and pay really a nominal fee or tax, depending on who you believe, whatever the wordage is.
Fee or tax, yeah.
But in any event, it's really quite a small tax. I guess the Supreme Court said it was a tax, so we'll call it a tax. It's a very small tax compared to what the premiums cost. So each business will have to look at what their finances are. I, of course, haven't looked at all the businesses, but from what I understand and what I've seen, the vast majority could save millions of dollars if they're large enough, or thousands if they're smaller, if they drop their employees from insurance. And if that happens, then the employee either has to will either get their own private insurance through a private carrier, which may or may not be available, or they may or may not be able to afford, or they'll go into an exchange. And there's been a lot of information and discussion about state exchanges. I mean, whether the states run them or whether the federal government runs them, but the bottom line is every state will have this health care insurance pool that if your employer drops you or drops everybody, all the employees, then you'll have to go into it. And what that means is that
You have to, so.
you'll have to go into it.
So if we have like Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Well, let's say you work for Company X, and Company X looks at it and says, well, I can pay a $2,000 fine. Let's just throw some numbers out. I mean, they're not actual, because obviously I don't know the company, but we're just using this as an example. So Company X says, well, I can pay a fine of $2,000 and drop my employee, each employee, or I can pay their health insurance, which is $10,000. Now, there's a lot of argument in the press about whether the companies will do that or not. As it gets closer to time, a lot of people are saying that companies in the under 100 employee type will probably drop their employees because their margins are so close and things are so tight, especially in this economy, that people need jobs. Okay, and so they're not going to go job hunting because there aren't jobs to hunt for. Okay, so they will get the company would drop because they would save $8,000 an employee. Then that person would be left to go to the exchange. Now in the exchange,
and they have to.
They have to. Well, if you don't, if your employer dropped you, now you have no health insurance, which is not a good thing, and you say I need to get some. Okay. You can say, I go to the exchange and get it, or you can say, well, no, I don't want insurance. I'm young. I don't think I'm going to get sick. I don't think I'm going to get appendicitis. I don't think I'm going to be in a car wreck. You don't get health insurance. Well, then you have to pay a tax.
Okay.
Okay.
And then what if I say, well, I want to get Blue Cross Blue Shield? Is that option available?
Well, right now, as the exchanges get set up, the exchanges are supposed to have both private carriers in the exchange as well as federal. The problem is the federal government going to play fair with the private insurance? In other words, we all know the federal government can subsidize, right? Yeah. Because they can tax people to subsidize. So what if the government's policy is for you $500 a month and the Blues is $750? Well, what are you going to buy? You're probably going to buy the government. So the government can financially manipulate the market. Now, right now they're saying, well, they'll be fair about it.
Oh, right, yeah.
But that's not been written.
Yeah.
So that's what you're looking at. Now, if you don't buy the insurance, then you have to pay a tax, because remember the Supreme Court said it's not a fee, it's not a penalty, it's a tax. And that's what got everybody excited. In fact, President Obama has said the Supreme Court was wrong. He said that Roberts was wrong in calling it a tax. It's not a tax, it's a fee. But Roberts said if it's a fee, then it's unconstitutional. The only way it's constitutional is tax. So it's interesting, you still have this dichotomy of, the legalese of words. But in the law, they're important.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you look at it, that's where you'll be. You'll either be paying a tax or you'll be buying your own insurance through a state exchange, which most likely, my bet would be that the federal program will be subsidized by taxes and it'll be cheaper. And so most of the people are going to have a state or federal insurance plan, which means we're going to have a single payer system for the vast, basically for the country. To me, when you look at something as major as this is, because it really is major, remember the Vice President said that behind the President's ear, this is really a big blanking deal. And it was, because it is a huge power shift.
Yeah.
And I, we talk about loss of our personal freedoms, and many people argue that it had nothing to do with our personal freedoms. But I would argue that if someone is paying for something, they really control that.
Oh, right.
And so once you abdicate your responsibility to pay for something and you let somebody else pay for it, then they can come back and tell you how to do it. Now, those who have great faith in governments and don't feel that they can be anything but good would say, well, they'll never do anything bad. And I would say if you look at the history of powerful governments, it's a dangerous game. Government is the only institution that can legally take your money without a product. They can incarcerate you and take away your freedom, and they can send you to war for you to die. That's about as powerful as you get. And so when you have an institution that's that powerful and you give it now the freedom to control what goes on from your health standpoint or the cost of your health, to me that was a huge giveaway for the American population that voted for this. And I would say they were fairly naive in not understanding that. The other point that I think is again very basic to this whole argument is that once the government is paying for this and they become the monopoly. Most people don't like monopolies. No. We learned that 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago with Teddy Roosevelt. And yet we're giving the government a monopoly in our health care. And I would say, there's not a whole lot more important than our individual health. But we're giving the government the control to really insert itself in that. And the question is, how far will they go? In other words, let's say that the government says, well, for instance, obesity, anybody who is 110% over where their basic metabolic index should be, where their weight should be, they're not allowed to eat chocolate. Because if they do, we're going to have to pay for their bad knees, for their arthritis, for their heart disease, for their stroke, for their asthma, all the things that happen. And is that where we want it to be? Well, we've let the government, they're in control.
Yeah, I'm glad you were talking about a monopoly, because I try to tell people, who criticize big business, and maybe some of them should be criticized, I don't know, but at least there's, the Fortune 500 club, like hundreds of big businesses that share the power. And maybe we don't like that, but are we willing to instead scrap all of that and give all that power to the government?
The government's the largest business in the world.
Exactly.
It's the largest business in the world, and as I said, it's the only business. I don't know of any business that can take your money without giving you a product.
Yeah, or send you off to war.
Or send you off to war, or to incarcerate you. I don't know of any business that can do that. In fact, you have a lot of protection, but if the government says that's what they want to do, you don't have protection. You have to then just feel the government's going to be good to you.
Yeah.
And historically, that's not where things go when they get too powerful. But again, if people, I think it might have been Jerry Ford that said, you may want the government to take care of you, but first of all, they can't, because there are too many of us and there are too few of them. And secondly, if you want them to have that much power to be able to take care of you, maybe you don't want them to. For instance, let's say that you have hypertension, okay? And for whatever reason, even though your drugs are free now, okay, you don't go to the drugstore and get them. Or they make you feel kind of drowsy and you don't like to take them, so you don't take them. Now, the government comes in and says, Mr. Smith, if you don't take them, you're going to end up with, your kidneys are going to die, you're going to end up with renal failure, and you're going to have a stroke, which is true, the long-term results of not taking your medicine. So the person should take their medicine. But now the government pays for that dialysis, pays for the stroke, it pays for everything, and it says, I'm going to come into your house. I'm going to send somebody to your house. I'm going to give you the pill every day, and you better take it. If you don't take it, that may be a federal offense. You see, where does it stop?